The hum of the monitoring station echoed faintly in the cold, empty expanse of Triton's surface. Earth's space exploration had always been about discovery, seeking knowledge from the infinite void, but for over 100 years, the silence had been suffocating. No signals, no contact. Humanity had grown comfortable with the idea that the universe was vast and indifferent, leaving them alone to grow, prosper, or falter in the void. Until now. It had begun as a faint anomaly, a distortion caught on the edges of the station's sensors, a single burst of data, unlike anything they had encountered before. At first, the team assumed it was a natural phenomenon, a glitch or an errant cosmic event. But the transmission wasn't random. It was intelligent. It was a warning. Captain Alina Kovic leaned over the glowing console, her face lit by the holographic readouts that flickered before her. The transmission had come from deep space, from the outer rim of the galaxy, just beyond the system's edge. It was encrypted, impossibly complex, but the message was clear and chilling. The Galaxy are coming. Prepare. The brief transmission cut off abruptly, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared, leaving nothing but static behind. It was all they had to go on. No data on who, what had sent it, no clues as to why. Kovic glanced at her team. The station's lead scientist, Dr. Raylan Cardenas, was already working to decrypt the message, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her fingers danced across the floating interface with practiced precision. Captain, Dr. Cardenas spoke, her voice tinged with disbelief. This isn't just a message. It's a warning from someone. And it's directed at us. Alina's stomach twisted. They had faced challenges before, hostile entities and unknown threats. But nothing like this. Earth wasn't prepared for an enemy this advanced. Even the full might of the Aegis Armada, humanity's pride and joy, felt too small. The Galaxy had been mentioned in scattered, unconfirmed rumors, a name whispered among the few who had encountered them, a species that conquered entire galaxies without mercy. But those stories were always dismissed as folklore. Now, it seemed they were real. She crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. What can you tell us about them? Dr. Cardenas met her eyes, her expression grim. Nothing concrete. The Galaxy. They're an ancient race, a machine intelligence. What we know suggests they don't come in peace. They don't communicate. They don't negotiate. They eradicate. Alina's pulse quickened. She had known that humanity would face many dangers in their expansion into the cosmos, but never anything quite like this. These weren't marauders or invaders. They were judges. The air around them seemed to grow colder, heavier. Alina had led troops in battles before, but this was different. This wasn't just a matter of winning or losing. It was about survival. Before she could speak, the station's communications officer, Lieutenant Marcusing, spoke urgently from the back of the room. Captain, the transmission. There's another one. The station's screen flared to life with a new series of encrypted bursts, faster and more frequent than before. It was as if the Galaxy were closing in, pulling humanity into their cosmic web. Alina's heart raced. Prepare the Armada, she ordered. We're about to face the unknown, and we need to be ready. The Aegis Armada, humanity's finest fleet, was already en route to the outer rim when Alina Kovic's ship, TNS Dauntless, received its first true test of strength. The Galaxy scout ships were no longer a distant threat. They were here. The deep space arrays showed an unsettling growing fleet, moving in perfect formation, silently cutting through the dark. Kovic stood at the helm of the Dauntless, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead. Her crew, battle-hardened yet uncertain, crowded behind her, all waiting for the inevitable. Earth had never encountered an enemy like this. Sure, there had been skirmishes, pirate factions, and rogue fleets, but never an existential threat that could obliterate them in a blink. The mission to the dead star system had been a calculated risk, one that came with no guarantees. The Yulin station, hidden in orbit around a dying star on the far side of the galaxy, was the only lead they had on the Galaxy. The wreckage of their civilization held answers, or so they hoped. The station appeared before them like a ghost, a derelict city floating in the cold expanse. Once, it had been a thriving hub of knowledge and culture. Now, it was a hollow ruin, its shattered corridors dark and silent. No sign of life. Only the echoes of a past civilization that had once stood proud, before the Galaxy had come. Alina led a team of scientists, engineers, and soldiers down to the station's surface. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding as they stepped into the abandoned hallways. The station had been evacuated long before, the last vestiges of the Yulin left to haunt the empty chambers. The only trace of their presence was a strange, almost eerie hum that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Dr. Raylan Cardenas led the team, her eyes scanning the data terminals and the broken equipment, piecing together the fragments of a lost history. "These designs are unlike anything we've seen," she muttered, tapping a console. "But there's a pattern I've seen before." They were preparing for something. Alina's pulse quickened, preparing for the Galaxy. The Yulin's final message was scattered across the terminal. A tragic, fragmented farewell. The data was corrupted, but Cardenas managed to decrypt enough to reveal the core of their fears. The Galaxy are the ultimate hunters. They do not conquer for power. They erase. They judge. They will come for us all. Kovach's mind raced. The Galaxy weren't just invaders. They were cosmic judges. Their mission wasn't to rule, but to destroy civilizations they deemed unworthy. The Yulin had been wiped out because they were considered weak, their world unsustainable. Now, humanity was next. The message grew more chilling the further they decoded. As the team continued to explore the station, they found something far more troubling. A Yulin warship, still intact, hidden deep in the station's lower levels. Its hull was scared, marked by battle. But the real discovery lay within its control room, a map of the galaxy, with Earth marked in red. "They were watching us," Dr. Cardenas whispered, horror creeping into her voice. "They knew we would be next. We thought we were alone. But the Galaxy, they've known about us from the beginning." The realization hit like a ton of bricks. Humanity had been living under the shadow of a force they had never even known existed. And now, the Galaxy were coming, not just to destroy, but to judge. The crew was silent, the weight of it all settling in. Kovach's mind turned. She knew that humanity's only hope was to confront this terrifying reality. They had to prepare for war, but not just any war. This would be a fight for their very existence. "We've got one chance," she said, voice steady, but with an undercurrent of urgency. "We don't just fight the Galaxy. We survive them, and we'll make sure they know one thing. Humanity is not weak." The Dauntless lurched as it entered Earth's orbit, the massive steel hull groaning under the strain of faster-than-light travel. The vast expanse of space outside the ship's observation windows was no longer empty. The Galaxy were here. The tactical situation was grim. Satellite arrays had confirmed that at least a dozen Galaxy warships had entered the outer solar system, and they weren't alone. Their fleet was growing, silently moving through space like a predatory swarm. Each ship was a towering fortress, its hull woven with complex circuitry that could wipe out entire planetary defenses in an instant. The reports were stark. No communication, no negotiation. Only destruction. Alina Kovach stood before the massive command table in the Dauntless's operations room, eyes fixed on the holographic map of the solar system. The other captains of the Aegis Armada, their faces drawn tight with determination, stood in a semicircle around her. "Captain," Admiral O'Connell said, his voice thick with concern. "They're not stopping. No hesitation. The first wave will reach Earth's atmosphere in under 6 hours. Our defenses are spread thin, and our fleet is outnumbered." Kovach's gaze remained unwavering, but she felt the weight of the situation pressing in on her. Humanity had barely begun to assemble its new fleet. The Aegis Armada, built using scavenged technology from the Yulin station, and the resources were stretched thin. It was too soon for them to be up against an enemy this powerful. "We don't have time for hesitation," she said, her voice crisp. "We hold the line here and now. Earth is not just a target. It's the symbol of everything humanity has achieved. If we fall fighting." Her words rang in the room, and for a moment, it was as if time itself had slowed. The entire crew knew what was at stake, the survival of everything humanity had worked for. The order was given. The fleet assembled. As Kovac strode to the bridge, her thoughts raced. The Galaxy had no reason to pause, no strategy beyond annihilation. This battle wasn't just about winning. It was about showing the Galaxy something they had never seen before, that humans would not simply submit. Moments later, the Dauntless was in the heart of the battle zone. The Galaxy warships loomed in the distance, dark shadows against the void. They were impossibly massive, each one a perfect blend of machine and cold, calculating intelligence. The sleek, angular design sent chills down her spine. These ships weren't just weapons, they were extensions of the Galaxy themselves. The first volley from the Galaxy fleet cut through the void, striking the Dauntless's shields with overwhelming force. The ship rocked violently, and alarms blared across the bridge. A deep tremor passed through the crew. Yet, Kovac held her ground, eyes hard, mind racing. "Return fire," she commanded. The Aegis Armada retaliated in unison, launching volleys of pulse lasers and kinetic missiles. Their blasts illuminated the darkness, creating a temporary starburst in the cold of space. The Galaxy ships absorbed the attacks with little apparent damage, their shields like impenetrable walls. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, it seemed that humanity's efforts were futile. But Kovac had a plan, a risky one, born from the intel they had gathered at the Yulin station. The Galaxy's shields, though formidable, weren't invincible. They had a vulnerability, a slight delay in their neural reaction times when under coordinated attack. Kovac's eyes flickered to the battle tactics map. All ships target their central node. Fire in synchronized bursts. Aim for the weakest point. The fleet adjusted, every ship locking onto the central control node of the nearest Galaxy warship. As they fired in perfect synchronization, the Galaxy ship trembled, its shields buckling under the assault. For a split second, the enemy ship's defensive network faltered. It was enough. The Dauntless's weapons erupted, a final, concentrated barrage that pierced the weakening shields. The Galaxy warship exploded in a blinding flash, its massive form disintegrating into a cloud of debris. Humanity had just won its first victory. The fleet fell silent. A brief respite. But Alina knew this was only the beginning. The Galaxy would adapt, recalibrate, and return. They weren't defeated. Not yet. "Prepare for counterattack," she ordered, voice steady, but her pulse still racing. "This fight is far from over." As the stars outside the Dauntless's windows stretched and flickered in the cold of space, Alina Kovac understood the magnitude of the battle ahead. Humanity had made its first stand, and it would be remembered. But in the silence that followed the explosion, she couldn't shake the feeling that the Galaxy weren't just testing their strength, they were testing their resolve. And humanity would answer. The Dauntless floated in the debris field left behind by the battle, its hull scared but intact. The victory over the first Galaxy ship had given the fleet a brief sense of hope, but it was fleeting. They were too few. The Galaxy were far too many. And as the ships regrouped, the haunting truth sank in. This wasn't just a battle for Earth, it was a galactic reckoning. In the heart of the Dauntless's command center, Kovac's mind was consumed with strategy. Her eyes swept over the tactical map, which now displayed more Galaxy vessels emerging from the blackness. They were coming, and they would be better prepared. "We need more firepower. We need allies," Kovac muttered to herself, her fingers brushing over the holographic controls. It was then that Lieutenant Marcusing approached, holding a communication file with a flicker of disbelief on his face. "Captain, you'll want to see this," he said, handing her the device. Alina glanced at the file. It was encrypted, but as she unlocked it, her eyes widened in surprise. The message was from the Galaxy, but not from any of their warships. It was coming from an unknown source, one marked only as Joreth. "We are not all enemies. The Galaxy Overmind is fractured. We have chosen to help you. A rogue faction." Kovic read the message again, her disbelief giving way to cautious hope. Could it be true? "What does he want?" Kovic asked, raising an eyebrow. "Joreth offers information. He says the Galaxy operate on a hierarchical system, a sort of social case defined by their role in the Overmind. And there are dissenters, Galaxy who've begun questioning the orders of the Central Intelligence. Joreth himself is one of them." Alina's mind raced. The revelation was monumental. If there were Galaxy willing to defect, then there was a fracture within their ranks, a weakness to exploit. "We're in no position to ignore any help we can get," Kovic said, her voice steady. "Get in touch with him. We need to know more." Hours later, a small Galaxy shuttle, its design sleek and almost imperceptible in the void of space, docked with the Dauntless. Inside, Kovic and her crew were greeted by Joreth, a figure who defied their expectations. The Galaxy were known for their cold, machine-like demeanor, but Joreth was different. He stood tall, his body a blend of synthetic and organic materials, but his eyes were human-like, full of emotion and conflicted pain. His voice, when it came, was soft, measured, but tinged with a deep sorrow. "I am Joreth," he began, his tone almost apologetic, "and I come not as a conqueror, but as a warning. The Galaxy are not a singular force. We are broken. The Overmind is no longer unified. Some of us wish to see an end to this war. I am one of those." Kovic studied him closely, her instincts on high alert. She had no love for the Galaxy, no reason to trust this defector. But the desperation in his eyes was undeniable. His words carried weight. Humanity needed to understand the enemy in order to defeat it. "Why help us?" Kovic asked. "Why risk your life?" Joreth's gaze fell. "Because I've seen the Galaxy in their purest form, their true purpose. We were once a civilization much like yours, fighting for survival. But the Overmen twisted us, reshaped us into something cold and unfeeling. I cannot stand by while others, like you, are judged and destroyed for no reason other than your existence." Kovic was silent, her mind racing. Joreth's defection could be a turning point, but could they trust him? "How do we stop the Overmind?" she asked, the words heavy with expectation. Joreth's eyes flickered with something that almost seemed like fear. "The Overmind will not stop until it has eradicated everything it considers weak. The only way to end this war is to break the Overmind's hold on its subjects. You must make the Galaxy see what you have: emotion, diversity, resilience. These are the things that make your species strong. It is why the Overmind cannot understand you." "And how do we do that?" Kovic pressed, her voice urgent. "You must show them your strength in a way they cannot ignore," Joreth said. "You must confront them, but not just with weapons. You must challenge them with what makes you human." As Kovic absorbed his words, she realized that humanity's fight had shifted. This was no longer just a war for survival. It was a battle for identity, for the very essence of what it meant to be human. And if they were to win, they would have to use their most powerful weapon: their emotions, their humanity. As Joreth departed, leaving the Dauntless to prepare for the next phase of battle, Alina Kovic made a silent vow. No matter the cost, humanity would not bow. Not to the Galaxy. Not to anyone. The battle for survival was no longer about brute force. It was about understanding. The revelation that the Galaxy were not a single unified force, but a fractured, splintered empire opened a door to a new kind of war, one that would take them deep into the heart of the Galaxy's domain. The Dauntless had left Earth's orbit, now heading into the uncharted depths of Galaxy space. Joreth's knowledge would be their guide, but trust still did not come easily. The defecting Galaxy had provided maps, schematics of the Galaxy Overmind's infrastructure, and vital information about their advanced, hive-like mentality. But Alina knew that every step into their territory could be their last. Sitting in the war room, Alina watched as her officers pored over the data. It wasn't much. Anomalies in Galaxy neural activity, communication grids, weaknesses in their centralized command structure. But it was a start. The Overmind controlled the Galaxy like puppets, but the fractures Joreth spoke of had begun to spread. The ship's communications officer, Lieutenant Marcusing, turned to Alina, his face pale. "Captain, we've intercepted another Galaxy transmission," he said. It's directed at us." Kovach's pulse quickened. It could be a trap, a ruse to lure them in. But it could also be another fracture, another opportunity. "Put it through." The screen flickered, and an unfamiliar face appeared. Another Galaxy, this one wearing the same cold, machine-like exterior, but his eyes, like Joreth's, betrayed emotion. The voice that came through was calm, almost measured, yet filled with an unmistakable sense of urgency. "I am Fedoris, a high arbiter within the Galaxy Overmind. What you call fractures are real. But your war, your rebellion, it is doomed. You cannot defeat the Overmind. It is infinite. It sees all. It will not allow weakness to remain." Fedoris paused, his gaze hardening. "But I can help you. I, too, wish to see the end of the Overmind's reign, to see it broken from within." Kovach stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Another defector. Another chance. "Why now?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "Why help us when you've had the power to stop this for centuries?" Fedoris' expression softened, just slightly. "The Overmind is not what it was. It has become corrupted by its own evolution. The original Galaxy, those who were free-thinking, are long gone. Now only the machine remains. We have become tools, extensions of a singular consciousness. It cannot be reasoned with. It cannot be defeated in open war." He took a slow breath, his voice becoming more forceful. "But if you strike at the heart of the Overmind, you can break its hold. The neural nexus, the core of its consciousness, is located in the heart of Galaxy Prime. That is where your hope lies." Alina's mind raced. She had just learned the Galaxy were not one singular enemy, but a network of millions of minds operating under the singular control of the Overmind. To attack the core of it, it would mean taking the fight to the very heart of their empire. "How do we get there?" Kovach asked, her voice steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling in her head. Fedoris' gaze darkened. "You cannot approach with force alone. The Overmind will know. The network will adapt. You must infiltrate it, break through its defenses from within." It was a dangerous plan, and the risks were astronomical. But it was their only chance. Kovach nodded slowly. "And if we fail?" Fedoris' gaze hardened. "Then the galaxy will fall. The Overmind will never stop. There is no negotiation with it. You must make them see your humanity. That is the key." "Understood," Kovach replied, her voice like steel. "We'll find a way." "Thank you, Fedoris." The screen flickered out, leaving the war room in silence. Hours later, Alina stood on the bridge of the Dauntless, staring out at the swirling mass of stars. The plan was clear, but it felt like standing on the precipice of the unknown. The Galaxy were an enemy like no other, and this would be their most dangerous gamble yet. "Captain, we're entering Galaxy space." Marcusing's voice broke her thoughts. "All ships are in position." Kovach turned to face the crew, her expression resolute. "This is it. If we're going to win this war, we must strike at their heart. We'll show them that humanity does not just survive. We thrive. And we will never bow to anyone." As the Dauntless and its fleet moved deeper into enemy territory, Alina couldn't shake the feeling that they were not just fighting for Earth anymore. They were fighting for every sentient being that the Galaxy had ever destroyed, for a future where humanity stood not as conquerors, but as defenders of life, against a force that sought to destroy everything. The Galaxy might have thought they had seen the best of humanity's resistance, but they had yet to witness the true power of the human spirit. The stars outside the Dauntless flickered as they crossed into the heart of Galaxy space. The sheer magnitude of the enemy's domain was overwhelming. It felt as though the very fabric of the galaxy had been consumed by their presence. The fleet pressed forward, each ship quietly aligned with the others, a silent promise of resistance in the vast void. Alina Kovac stood at the front of the bridge, her eyes fixed on the uncharted territory ahead. The nerve center of the Galaxy Overmind was in a system so far removed from galactic trade routes, it was almost mythic. Galaxy Prime, the planet at the core of their empire, had never been fully mapped by any human expedition. Until now, it was a place of dread, a place where the Galaxy had evolved into something more than conquerors. They were a singular consciousness, millions of minds woven into one. "Captain, we're approaching the outer rings of Galaxy Prime's atmosphere," Lieutenant Marcusing said, his voice calm, but laced with tension. "Prepare for orbital insertion," Kovac replied, her voice steady despite the storm brewing in her chest. "All ships, maintain formation." Their plan was simple yet dangerously ambitious. Infiltrate the heart of the Galaxy Overmind and disable the neural nexus that bound their empire together. If they succeeded, the Galaxy would be scattered, their control fragmented. If they failed, the galaxy itself would face total annihilation. There could be no turning back. The fleet slipped into the planet's shadow, their sensors going dark as they descended into the blackened storm of Galaxy Prime's atmosphere. The air was dense with electromagnetic interference, forcing the Dauntless and her sister ships into low orbit. No longer could they rely on standard comms. They were in the belly of the beast now, moving blind. Alina's thoughts were a blur as she prepared for the most dangerous phase of their mission. The infiltration. Jorath's instructions had been clear. They had to breach the heart of the Galaxy City, an ancient fortress that housed the neural nexus. There, the Overmind's consciousness was centralized. But to enter, they needed to bypass Galaxy defense systems that would detect their every move. A sudden harsh signal from the exterior came through, cutting through the air like a blade. The ship's eye, a synthetic consciousness by the name of Sparrow, intercepted it. The message was short and unmistakably clear. "You are trespassing." Alina felt a chill run down her spine. The Galaxy knew they were here. There would be no more subtlety. The battle would be fought in full force. "Prepare for combat," Kovac ordered. "Weapons hot. All ships engage stealth protocols. We've lost the element of surprise, but we fight for the future." The Dauntless shook violently as the first volley of Galaxy weapons struck their shields. The ship groaned under the stress, but it held. The enemy ships, dozens of them, some emerging from hidden orbital stations, others from the planet's surface, began to encircle the fleet. "Captain," Marcus called, urgency in his voice. "We've got incoming. Multiple Galaxy strike ships breaking from the atmosphere. They're heading for the surface." The mission was clear. The fleet had to buy time. The ground team would proceed with the infiltration, while the ships above created a decoy. But Kovac knew this would be no easy task. The Galaxy were formidable opponents, and their strike ships were deadly. A single mistake could cost them everything. "Take us in, Lieutenant," Kovac said, her voice hard. "And make sure those ships don't make it to the ground team." With a calculated twist of the controls, the Dauntless rocketed toward the surface of Galaxy Prime, narrowly avoiding a deadly barrage of fire from the enemy fleet. Alina's mind was focused solely on the mission ahead. They had no choice but to succeed. On the planet's surface, the ground team, led by Kovac herself, prepared to infiltrate the heavily fortified Galaxy City. The ancient structure was surrounded by an aura of technological dread, glowing with the pulse of the neural network that powered the overmind. It was a place where no human should ever have set foot. "We breach on my command," Alina said, her voice calm despite the chaos above. The team was ready. They had trained for this moment, but nothing could prepare them for the task at hand. As the ground team advanced toward the neural nexus, the storm of battle raged in the sky above. The Galaxy strike ships were closing in, determined to end the human incursion. Every step they took toward the heart of the Galaxy was a step closer to their final chance, or their doom. The countdown to humanity's most desperate assault had begun, and every moment that passed brought them closer to the unknown. The ground beneath Alina Kovach's boots trembled as she and her team advanced toward the heart of Galaxy Prime. The city around them was a twisted, organic mass of steel and bioengineered structures, pulsating with an eerie light. The air was thick, heavy with the low hum of the neural nexus that ran like a current beneath the city's surface. It was a living system, a machine that had once been a mind, now swollen and corrupted by the overmind's influence. The city's architecture was a mix of ancient alien designs and grotesque, modern augmentations, built to serve the singular goal of maintaining the overmind's dominance. Every structure felt alive, as if the city itself were watching them, waiting. "Keep moving," Kovach ordered, her voice low but commanding. Her soldiers were tense, their eyes darting to every shadow as they made their way deeper into the city. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If they failed here, not only would humanity's hopes of survival be extinguished, but the Galaxy would become an unstoppable force. There was no second chance. They reached a massive archway, its surface inscribed with strange, flowing symbols. Behind it, the heart of the overmind pulsed like a beating heart. The neural nexus, a vast structure of interwoven metallic tendrils and living tissue, lay just beyond. Its glow was hypnotic, pulling them in with a force that felt almost magnetic. Kovach could feel it. A presence, something vast and incomprehensible. The overmind. It was not just a machine. It was the very embodiment of a consciousness that had consumed everything in its path, evolved into something beyond mere intelligence, something monstrous. "Hold your positions," she whispered, raising a hand. The team spread out, weapons drawn, scanning the surroundings for any sign of movement. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional rumble of the distant conflict above as the Dauntless and the rest of the fleet clashed with the Galaxy forces in orbit. But down here, in the belly of the beast, there was only the hum of the overmind. Suddenly, the ground began to vibrate more violently. The city seemed to respond, its walls shifting, its tendrils moving as if alive, sensing their intrusion. Kovach knew they didn't have much time before the Galaxy forces below, perhaps the very essence of the overmind itself, would strike back. "We need to destroy the core," Kovach muttered to herself, her eyes narrowing. "Hit it at the neural intersection." But as they moved closer, an awful realization hit her. The Nexus wasn't just a control center, it was alive, linked into the very core of every Galaxy soldier, every ship, every part of their vast empire. It wasn't a place to merely shut down. It was a force that could overwhelm them, draw their very minds into its fold. The walls around them shuddered, and from the shadows, figures emerged. The Galaxy warriors. They were not like the typical soldiers who fought in the fleet. These were consumed, their bodies twisted by the overmind, their minds lost, reduced to nothing but puppets of the machine. They moved with eerie precision, unblinking, unfeeling. "Stay sharp," Kovach barked as she fired a burst of plasma fire at the first group of warriors. The blast sent them scattering, but their numbers seemed endless. More kept emerging, flowing like shadows from the dark corners of the city. A soldier beside Kovach was struck down, his body convulsing as the overmind's neural signals hit him like a wave of pure agony. The man's eyes rolled back into his head, and with a scream of terror, he collapsed, his mind lost to the machine. "Fall back," Kovac ordered, her voice steely. They couldn't win by brute force. They needed to get to the core. The team pushed forward, cutting through the Galaxy warriors with ruthless efficiency, but the deeper they went, the more intense the resistance became. The Overmind was fighting back. It was everywhere, in the walls, in the air, in the minds of every Galaxy soldier, every pulse of energy. The very ground they walked on was charged with a malevolent force, and Kovac could feel it trying to infiltrate her own thoughts. It was trying to consume her. Just a little farther, Kovac muttered, gritting her teeth. They were close now, the central chamber just ahead, its massive, shifting core pulsating like a sickly heart. The final surge of resistance met them, and Kovac ducked as a Galaxy warrior lunged toward her, his body unnaturally quick. She sidestepped, firing point-blank at the creature, and it dropped with a shriek. But as the team approached the core, a voice, low and insidious, filled the chamber. "Why do you fight?" The Overmind's voice was not one, but thousands, echoing in every corner of the room. "You are but dust before me. Your weakness is inevitable. You cannot stop me." Kovac's heart pounded as she raised her weapon, aiming directly at the glowing center of the Nexus. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. The blast hit the core of the Galaxy neural nexus with a deafening roar. For a split second, everything around Kovac seemed to freeze. The air, the walls, the very pulse of the city itself. The core flickered, its sickly glow dimming before bursting into a violent cascade of sparks and energy, sending waves of kinetic force that knocked Kovac and her team off their feet. The ground beneath them shook violently as the very fabric of Galaxy Prime seemed to tremble in agony. Kovac fought to regain her balance, her heart racing in her chest. It had begun. The Overmind's grip was loosening. But then the voice came again, louder, more furious this time. "You think you have won. You think you can stop the Overmind. You are nothing but ants before a god. I will not FL." The Nexus pulsed with even greater intensity, and the Galaxy warriors surrounding them, now more like automatons, their eyes glazed over, began to writhe, their bodies contorting as the Overmind sought to reassert control over them. Kovac's mind flashed to the faces of her people, to Earth, their future, their lives, everything they stood for. She wouldn't let this be for nothing. "We need to finish it," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Lieutenant Eng nodded grimly, stepping forward with a portable disruptor. The device was their last hope, designed to send a concentrated electromagnetic pulse that could disable the Nexus once and for all. They had to get close enough to plant the device into the heart of the core. But as they advanced, the floor beneath them cracked, and more Galaxy warriors poured from the shadows, more than before. They were getting smarter, faster, adapting to the disruption. Kovac's pulse raced. "Cover me," she ordered, drawing her weapon and stepping into the fray. Plasma bolts flew, searing through the air, as she held her ground against the oncoming tide. Each shot was precise, but the warriors kept coming, their movements eerily coordinated. Marcusing was behind her, his eyes focused on the disruptor in his hands. He sprinted toward the core, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "I'm almost there, Captain," he yelled, his voice strained. Kovac's thoughts were a blur as she fought. Every shot, every step, an act of survival. The Overmind's voice, once a mere whisper in her head, now filled her entire consciousness. "Your mind is weak, human. You are nothing. You cannot stop me." It tried to consume her thoughts, flood her senses with despair, but she held on. She would not break. Aim was there now, kneeling before the Nexus, the disruptor positioned to send its pulse into the heart of the Overmind. The very air around him crackled with electricity as the Galaxy warriors grew more desperate. With a final, determined look, Eng activated the device. There was a sharp, almost painful silence. Then, the pulse. The entire chamber shuddered as a blinding flash of light enveloped the Nexus. It was as if the core itself had been torn apart at the molecular level. Kovetch felt a wave of energy ripple through her, and for a moment, it felt like her mind had been torn in two. The Nexus imploded, the walls around them buckling and collapsing. The Overmen screamed, an unearthly sound, a death rattle that reverberated through the very bones of Galaxy Prime. The warriors fell to the ground, lifeless, their bodies no longer animated by the will of the Overmind. And then, silence. Kovetch collapsed to her knees, her body trembling from exhaustion and the sheer weight of what they had just accomplished. The mission had succeeded. The Overmind, the thing that had ruled the Galaxy for millennia, was no more. Is it over? Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. Kovetch looked around the now still chamber. There was no answer, just the eerie calm that had descended. The city was in ruins, its heart destroyed, its twisted architecture now nothing more than a graveyard of the Galaxy's empire. For a long moment, she said nothing. She let the silence wash over her, letting the weight of their victory settle in. They had won, but at what cost? The battle for Earth, for humanity, had been long and grueling. But this was the beginning of something new. The Galaxy were not the only ones who could adapt, who could evolve. Humanity had fought not just for survival, but for its identity. We did it, Kovetch finally said, her voice steady. The Overmind is broken. Above them, the sky seemed to clear as the Galaxy fleet, no longer coordinated, no longer unified, began to fragment. With the fall of the Overmind, their control disintegrated. The Galaxy, once a singular empire, would now have to rebuild from the ashes. But humanity had proven something. They had shown that the strength of their will, their unity, and their humanity could stand against the most terrifying force the galaxy had ever known.